Greetings, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm carrying on my series for A-level history about the Third Reich, so Germany 1933 to 45. I was talking about the events after the burning down of the Reichstag. People called the Reichstag the funeral pyre of German democracy because Hitler moved swiftly to dismantle the democratic system in Germany. There was the law for the protection of the German Reich and Home passed in the immediate aftermath of the burning down of the Reichstag. So the Communist Party was outlawed because the Nazis claimed they'd nipped in the bud an incipient communist revolution, and people were just going to be sent to concentration camps without any trial. And those who were found guilty of a crime had the right of appeal abolished. Remember, usually if you're found guilty of a crime, one has the right to go to the court and say, please think about it again, you got it wrong. That's appeal. In some countries, you can appeal several times. Anyway, so the government could simply send people to jail indefinitely without trial or even charge. These were extraordinary security powers for the Chancellor, that was Adolf Hitler, but he said these were necessitated by the perilous situation. There was also protective custody brought in, so supposedly for your own protection, you could be sent to prison. And so sometimes people found not guilty of a crime, walked out of court and were immediately arrested by the police or even the SA and sent to prison and or a concentration camp. Well, that's another point, is the first concentration camps were opened. One was opened at Dachau, a bit north of Munich. Now, to begin with, the regime there was strict rather than savage. It was later to become savage, and many people were killed in concentration camps. But like with anything about the Nazis, is they started off being not too bad and got worse and worse and worse and then utterly satanic towards the end. So it may seem staggering that anybody would support the Nazis. So everybody knows about the countless atrocities committed by the Nazis, but they did do a few good things. And no, I'm not trying to suggest it was a balance. It was half good and half bad. There was definitely far more that was very wicked than the few good things they did. But the few positive things they did were at the beginning, and the most evil things they did were towards the end, which is why people became part of the movement, felt that they were deeply committed, and they would overlook the bad things. And then it got worse and worse, and by then it was too late. They were too deep in. Anyway, so communist politicians were swiftly rounded up and imprisoned. At the Kroll Opera House, where the Reichstag was meeting, socialist politicians attempted to vote against this, the Enabling Act, which was giving sweeping powers to the Chancellor, but these socialist politicians were physically held back in the debating chamber by members of the SA. So the Enabling Act was allowing the Chancellor, that was Hitler, to rule by decree indefinitely. However, this was not entirely novel. President von Hindenburg had been ruling by decree somewhat since the Great Depression started in 1929. Hitler's dictatorial powers were to last for 10 years. So when I say indefinitely, it was like on all matters that he could do this. And he was going to be allowed to change the constitution at will. The Reichstag only met 12 times after that. It was mostly to provide a good audience for Hitler when he wanted to deliver a major oration. So the Reichstag did vote on a few laws after 1933, but that was certainly symbolic because Hitler could have simply signed these things into law anyway because of the plenipotentiary powers that he had been granted. Right, so the Nazis said, oh, well, concentration camps, they're not too bad. The British, they imprisoned Afrikaner civilians in South Africa around 1900, and the great majority of them came out alive. Or Spanish people used concentration camps in Cuba in the 1890s. So they'd use the term precisely because it wasn't too shocking. Now, the British concentration camps, nobody was killed, not one person was shot or hanged, anything like that. And yes, some people did die of communicable diseases, and rations were meagre. But they're nothing like the concentration camps that were in Germany. No one was forced to work when they were in the British ones, whereas in the Nazi ones they were. It was fairly bad to begin with, and the most backbreaking slave labour towards the end. Right, so the Socialist Party moved its headquarters to Prague in nearby Czechoslovakia. That country doesn't exist anymore. Slovakia and the Czech Republic together, back then it was called Czechoslovakia. In time, the Socialists were going to shift their headquarters to Paris, latterly to London, when the German army took over France. Um, anyway, so March 1933, the elections went ahead as planned. The Nazis killed over 100 of their opponents. Now, there was some political violence from their opponents, but nothing like as much as from the Nazis. You've got to bear in mind the Nazis were not the only one with their private army. The communists had the Red Fighting Union, Rotkampfbund, sometimes called the Red Front, and there was the Black Red Gold Banner. I think it was for the DDP. The Jungdo, as in Jungdeutsche Ordnung, Young German Order for another political party. I get mixed up, which was with the Stahlhelm as in Steel Helm for the DNVP. But the Nazis were just the most brutal of the lot. People needed to have their bully boys because to protect their rallies. Political rallies were far more important than they are now. Remember, nobody had television back then. Most people didn't have radios. So if people wanted to engage in politics, they went to see speaker meetings in town halls on the streets in good weather. There'd be hundreds, maybe tens of thousands of people there. And so that's why, to protect their meeting, they needed their stewards in case people from the other party were going to try and disrupt it. And indeed, your heavies might go and try and break up their meeting. And so that's why people had their knuckleheads in uniforms. Sometimes they even had guns. So there's quite a lot of political violence in Germany before the Nazis came to office, and it continued after they came to office. So the Socialist Party were banned in time as well. Now, that summer of 1933, the other parties voted themselves out of existence, and a new law was passed against the formation of new political parties, or indeed the resurrection of a dissolved party. So this was a most extraordinary turn of events. Within 6 months of coming to office, the National Socialist Party was the sole legal party in Germany. Its slogan, Deutschland erwache, was used by many people who were not Nazis. So let me see. Another thing, in March 1933, the day of the German army, Hitler went to Potsdam, which is just south of Berlin. That was the headquarters of the army, to the garrison church, and he attended a ceremony there. And he was wearing a tail suit to be dressed as a real establishment figure, and he was toadying to the conservative elite. Conservative elite, that means generals, aristocrats, businessmen, some of the top civil servants, those who were nostalgic for the Kaiser. It was much better when Kaiser Wilhelm was around. We should restore him. They pined for the old system that had prevailed until the First World War. And the Nazis repeatedly dropped hints that they might restore the monarchy. In fact, they never did. But I think they were genuinely agnostic about it in the early 1930s. The Kaiser's fourth son, Alvi, or August Wilhelm, who was an enthusiastic Nazi, was there. An empty chair was left in the middle. The implication being, this is for the Kaiser. So that was that. Hitler was very keen to keep the conservative elite on side, which is why he was kowtowing. Now, this did not play well with certain sections of his own movement. Nazis, remember, are national socialists. And for some members of the Nazi party, that word socialist meant something. It wasn't just an electoral slogan. And they did not like trying to curry favour with the conservative elite. I'll come on to more of that later. So the SA was headed by Ernst Röhm, who'd commanded Hitler in the First World War. He talked about a second revolution, a brown revolution, as in the brown shirts. Get rid of the aristocratic-dominated army. The SA will be the army. Give the SA the artillery and tanks and so on. So the SA was 2 million strong by this time. The army officially was only 100,000 because of the Treaty of Versailles. In fact, they were cheating that quite considerably. There's no question the SA seriously outnumbered the army. Not all the SA were armed. They only had small arms. So the SA would be the defence force. He felt the officer corps were too posh, too effete, too foreign influenced, and that was it. They weren't authentically German enough. He said, we don't like the upper classes. They're over-sophisticated. They have foreign tastes. The poor people, they're the true Germans, particularly if they live in the countryside. So Hitler was not doing enough for the proletariat as he saw it. Rome had joined the Nazi party because it was revolutionary, as he said. And he didn't care about ideology that much beyond that. He's the kind of person who could easily have been a communist. Anyway, so the SA had been part of the Nazi party, and then it was a state agency. So they'd been used to being very boisterous, or beating people up, smashing things, even killing people. before they come to office. But once the Nazi Party was the government, they were supposed to behave more responsibly, but they were still letting off steam by killing people, and this disorder was worrying much of public opinion. So Rome's inflammatory rhetoric frightened the horses amongst the conservative elite. So Hitler had to assure the officer corps that the army would not be abolished, that Rome was not going to be able to give them orders, things like this. Rome was an increasingly embarrassing figure for Hitler. Another thing is Ernst Röhm was very actively homosexual. That was illegal at the time, not just in Germany, but almost every country in the world, those without Napoleonic law, that is. I'll leave it there.